What's up? It's Cherith, the Starry-Eyed Tarot Reader. It's my end of year wrap-up. I know it's already 2024, but I'm a little late. I'm always a little late. It's fine. It's been a heck of a year. 2023 was an interesting one. So was 2022. Yeah, well, been kind of rough years for me, so kind of hoping 2024 is better, more stable. Yeah. Anyway, for all its flaws, 2022 was the year I decided to pick a certain. Sorry, this is like my wrap up of 2022 and 2023 and rundown of the decks I used in 2022 and 2023. Don't worry, I won't go through. I'm actually not going to go through any of them. I'm just going to do like a broad overview of how I approached working with decks, how I started approaching working with decks. In 2022, I decided to pick a certain number of decks to work with exclusively each month. I started in May of that year, so that was when I decided to do that. That was when I realized that there were decks I had that I wasn't working with, that I'd had for a certain number of years and had just been sitting around collecting dust. So I started with 6 decks, 5 tarot, 1 oracle. I didn't know at first how many decks exactly I had exactly, so I wasn't sure how many decks I should have been working with each month, so I could work with every deck I owned. I think it was July or August when I created a spreadsheet with all of the decks that I owned so I could keep track of the ones that I had already worked with and the ones that I still needed to work with. I've color coded it according to colors I can see. I'm sure that my legal administrator at my job would be very happy to hear I've created a spreadsheet. She loves spreadsheets. I can guarantee I haven't made it as complicated as her spreadsheets or as colorful because I don't see as many colors. The only month I skipped in 2022, not counting the months before I started doing this, was sorry, I have my little script here and my screen went dark because I've been playing with my camera. It's saying stuff to me and I'm ignoring it. The only month I skipped that year, not counting the month before I started, was August. It was one of the decks I worked with in July. I think I've mentioned this before in a video I did not too long ago. The Star Child Akashic Tarot. Working with that deck became so difficult that month that I kind of lost. I don't want to say my appetite, but I lost any interest. I struggled to want to work with any tarot deck because of how much I started to dislike working with that deck, and my feelings towards that deck sort of bled over into all of my other decks, and I just didn't want to work with any of them. So I took a break that year in August to kind of reset and not really reevaluate, but decide, like, moving forward, if that happened again, how I would approach it. So I took a break and then I started back up again in September. I know the month of the year. And I finished out pretty good. I didn't wind up working with every deck in 2022. One of the biggest takeaways, I think, from when I started doing this was to take my time to introduce newer decks or start working with newer decks. One of the things I discovered that I was doing was I would get a new deck and I would immediately start working with it like that month or the next month. And then some of the older decks I had would sit even longer without having been worked with, and I wound up putting some of them in what I'm calling the danger zone. because I wasn't sure I was going to be able to continue working with them because I hadn't worked with them in so long, and I just didn't have the same connection with them. So it was a big lesson for me to learn in 2022 working with tarot decks that I needed to take some time. I needed to take time with newer decks and not immediately start working with them. I needed to give myself time to work with the older decks I had and to introduce the newer decks into like the rotation. I've done a pretty good job of that. Moving forward, I still, you get a new deck and you just want to like break into it and start like learning it and everything. And I think everybody kind of does that when they have a hobby or when they are really into something and they get a new thing. It's the new thing and you want to start working with the new thing because it's so exciting and new. And I think a lot of times people do that and they forget, the older things that they have that, they work with or can start working with and get to know better. I actually found, I think it was in 2023, there was a deck I put in the danger zone. I had issues working with it before, and when I worked with it again, I fell in love with it, and it's become one of like my top 10 decks. But that was like my biggest takeaway from 2022 is learning to be slower with introducing new decks into working with them. Because like I said, quite a few of the decks that I hadn't worked with in 2022, I've put in like a little corner of my room in here, and I'm gonna get rid of them because I tried working with them and I just didn't have any sort of connection anymore. 2023 was only slightly less tumultuous than 2022. I wound up skipping the first few months of the year because I was staging and everything in my house was packed. Most everything in my house was packed. All of my tarot decks except I think I kept out like 5, and then I got a couple that like were Kickstarters that I had been waiting on. But pretty much all of my decks were packed. So I didn't feel it was right to like track those months because I wasn't working with all of my decks. I didn't have access to all of them, so I didn't even bother. Like I said, I kept decks out and I worked with them, but because they were the only ones I worked with for several months, I just was like, I'm not even gonna track this. It's not part of what I'm doing. So yeah, when I moved to the new place, same city, just different neighborhood, a little bit further away from where I used to live. And then it took like a month to unpack everything and get settled. So I wound up skipping. I think I didn't start again until May. No, I moved in April. So I think it was like June. I should know this. Believe it was June when I started working with decks again. Started back up on this project that I've been doing for a couple of years now. Trying to track where I am on my screen here. So in 2023, I kind of broke it down by like month and things I learned each month. I think it was it? Hang on. Sorry, now I have to check something. 2022. No, I'm sorry. We're talking about 2023 because it's 2024 now. Okay, it was May. So I moved in April. I got settled. So it was around May that I started up with this again. Sorry, I should know that. It wasn't that long ago. It was in May I started this project again. So picked out a certain number of decks. By that point, I had my spreadsheet and I knew how many decks I had, so I've now broken it down to like how many decks I need to work with each month from like tarot and how many from Oracle in order to get all of my decks by the end of the year. That's the goal. But so in 2023, like I said, in May I started up again. I didn't have any notes for May. Like I said, I was breaking it down by like month. So every month I was trying to say, like, what did I learn this month? In June, I started to track my readings, started to write them down in a Word document. Like every time I sat down with my decks and did a reading. So if it was like every day, or if it was like for the week, I read with like, these 3 decks and then these 2 decks and then this deck. I was trying to like track that because I noticed in 2022 that there were a lot of synchronicities. I was pulling a lot of the same cards from different decks. Without tracking that, I felt like I really wasn't getting the message. I wasn't really able to like go back and think about, I pulled the King of Swords from these 3 decks, and how are they different in these 3 decks? How do they look different? How is the artwork different? How are they the same? Like, what are these 3 decks trying to tell me? Other than things I don't want to listen to. So I felt like I was losing a lot by not tracking my readings. So in June, I decided, I just started with like a Word document. I've changed that. I'll get to that in a minute. But I just started with a Word document. So I had like a Word document, I dated it, and then I had like a list of like the decks and then the cards I pulled from the decks. Not a super efficient way to do that. It didn't really give me an opportunity to like interpret the readings. It just was like, here's the cards you pulled from the deck. Great. That doesn't tell me a whole lot. And in July, because like I said, I was trying to limit how quickly I was using new decks. But in July, I think I had just gotten this deck maybe the month before. This is, it's not gonna focus because, well, that side's blank. That helps. There we go. There's words. I thought there was words on the other side. I apologize. This is Mimit, the Mini Mice. Wow, there we go. There we go. Mini Mice Tarot. I love this deck. I started working with this deck in July. I think I'd only had it, I think I'd gotten it in June, but I really wanted to start working with it because it's mini and it's mice and it's this whole world these people have created, these creators. The guidebook is amazing. I love it. It's like every card, it's like this little story. So like, sorry, I'm just gonna get into this really quick. It's fine. It's my video. I can choose to do that. So like the star, the little entry for the star is, Ladina had continued to water that seed for over 8 years. Only when the full moon was high, as her grandmother had recommended in her last moments, putting in her paws what she called her last touch of magic. They all laughed after her, at least until, at last and all at once, a pod sprouted upward. Ladina never gloated about it. She didn't need to. She was right. So they're all like that. They're all like these little stories of the little mice and the cards. And it is just absolutely amazing and breathtaking. And I've fallen in love with this deck. So here's what the star card. That's Ladina. Their little plant. So gorgeous. And so, like I said, I got it in June and I immediately wanted to work with it because it's mini and it's mice and it was gorgeous. So I started working with it in July. And I got to the end of July, and for the most part, actually not for the most part, up until that point, the decks I had been working with every month from when I started in May of 2022 up to that point, by the end of the month I was ready to like move on and start working with other decks. This was the first time that I got to the end of the month and I didn't want to stop working with this deck. It felt like it had more to tell me. So I decided that I was going to work with Mimit for the rest of the year. Like I would still have other decks that I would have every month and those would change, but this was going to be like the deck that I would work with like overarching all the other decks. It would be the deck I'd work with from, what did I say, June? Sorry. July, from July to the end of the year, and I did, and it was fantastic, and I got some amazing readings from it. It's funny, I worked with it probably the longest I've worked with a deck since I started this, and I found I was pulling a lot of the same cards, which is fine. It had things to tell me over and over again. So I decided I was going to do that in 2024, and 2024, the deck I've chosen for my like year-long deck is the traditional Korean deck. There we go. When I got this deck and I looked through it for the first time, I had probably one of the most interesting reactions I've had to a new deck, I think, ever. I typically, when I flip through a deck, I don't go super fast. I take my time, and I like kind of sitting with the cards as I'm doing like just an initial flip through. With this deck, I found that I was taking far longer than I've ever taken in flipping through a new tarot deck for the first time. I was literally stopping and resting on the cards for like each card for like 10 minutes. I was getting so lost in the artwork and just everything about this deck. Trying to go fast because if I stop, I'll just wind up not moving. It was like time started to slow down. It was really weird, really interesting. I just felt this sense of not heaviness, but like when everything gets really still. It's the most interesting reaction I've had to a new deck. So I decided this would be my deck of the year in 2024. It felt like there was something there. This deck has a lot to tell me, so I'll be working with it exclusively amongst my other rotating decks for the rest of this year. I'm very excited. I've also already picked my deck of the year for 2025. It's a deck that I decided towards the end of 2024 was going to be my present to myself. I bought it. I think it might hold the record so far for the most expensive deck I own. It is I think it's Mysteries of the Black Madonna is what it's called. A lot of YouTubers have talked about that deck. Well, they talk about the Mysteries of the Madonna deck. This is the Mysteries of the Black Madonna. I believe the creator is working on another deck. It's Mysteries of the Red Madonna. It's absolutely stunning deck. I never thought that I would want that deck. I admire from the moment I heard about that deck, I admired the artistry that the creators put into it. They create little shadow boxes and take pictures of it, and that's the tarot deck. It's absolutely stunning. I never thought I would want that deck, but like I said, at the end of 2023, there was something I started getting drawn towards it, and I was like, all right, that's going to be my Christmas present to myself. So I bought it, and it's going to be my deck of the year in 2025. There's a lot there, and I've decided with this deck, with the traditional Korean, and I'll probably do this with the Mysteries of the Black Madonna when I start working with it, instead of doing what I've been starting to do, or what I started to do in 2022 with my cards, which was, pull 3 cards, sometimes 4, but not usually more than that. Occasionally I'll use a spread. I want to try to do that more this year. But for the traditional Korean and the Mysteries of the Madonna, I've decided I'm going to do like 1 card, because there's so much there, and there's so much in the guidebook, and there's so much in the artwork that I feel like pulling 3 cards and trying to get like any sort of meaning from the cards and the guidebook. It's just going to be so overwhelming that it's better to just pull one card. So that's what I'll be doing with my deck of the year for this year and next year. Like I said, I'm very excited. They're absolutely gorgeous. Like I said, working with Mimit for 6 months was astonishing. Like, that deck, I feel like, taught me a lot. I have written here, if I hadn't already been smitten with that deck, that would have sealed it. And that's so true. If I hadn't already been in love, I was in love with that deck before I got it. And if I hadn't been in love with that deck before I got it, working with it for 6 months solid, yeah, absolutely would have done it for me. And then in August of 2023 was when I decided that I would do the same thing with Oracle decks. I didn't really feel compelled to pick an Oracle deck for the rest of 2023. At that point, it was like the year's almost over. I'll just start doing that in 2024. So in 2024, this year, my Oracle deck that I'll be working with all year with a rotating group of Oracle decks is the Wild Unknown Archetypes by Kim Krans. I've had this deck for a while. I've been hesitant to work with it. It's one of those decks that there's so much there that working with it felt very intimidating, which is why I've decided I'm going to work with it for an entire solid year. So, and it'll be fine because, you know, Oracle decks are different anyway, and you can do kind of different things with them. I feel like, not that there's like rules with tarot, but it's easier with Oracle decks to just be like, I'm going to pull one card, or, you know, I'm going to pull 2 cards, or I'm going to pull 15 cards. I feel like, anyway, it's easier to do that with Oracle than tarot. I don't know what Oracle deck I'll be using for 2025. I haven't decided that one yet. But I'm excited to work with Wild Unknown. I've worked with it briefly before, and it is an amazing Oracle deck. It's probably, that Oracle deck is one of the reasons I have issues working with other Oracle decks, because it's so deep. There's so much there, and it feels like some other Oracle decks aren't the same. So, very, very excited for that. I think it was, yeah, so in November was when I realized that just having a Word document with my readings wasn't cutting it. I was still missing a lot. I felt like missing a lot of like interpretations. So I'm trying to, starting this year, I'm going to try to track my readings in a PDF journal. It offers some more options. PDF journal offers more options about, like, not just these are the cards I pulled, but what was my emotional state at the time? What was like the phases of the moon? You know, what sort of themes were in the cards, like colors and stuff. And I do a whole lot with colors because you can't see them. But I think it's still interesting to track that sort of thing as much as I can. And I feel like that'll really help get more from the readings I do for myself than just, hey, I pulled, you know, the 9 of Pentacles, the 10 of Swords, and the, you know, the moon from this deck this day. And I pulled the 9 of Pentacles, the Queen of Swords, and, you know, I don't know, 10 of Cups from this deck the same day. Not really cutting it. That's just like a transcript. Transcript of what cards I pulled. It's really not. Not the thing. I need more than that. And I've realized I need more than that. My biggest takeaway from 2023 was that I needed to really balance reading as a tool versus a chore. At one point I really had to step back because I was making myself sit down every night and read with my decks. And the other thing was because I wanted to try to read with every deck. So I had so many, it became exhausting. Every single day pulling from like 7 or 8 different decks is too much. Tarot decks, and that was just the tarot decks. Then it was like 3 or 4 oracle decks, and it was just too much. So I had to be like, okay, do we have to pull from every single deck every day, or can I pull from like these 2 this day, and then these 2 this day, and then these 4 this day? And so it was balancing, like, I have to do this ridiculous thing I've set for myself versus like this is a chore. Like, I have to do the dishes, I have to sit down and read with every single tarot deck, today. Versus no, I read tarot and I'm learning tarot as a tool, as a means to help me understand myself and my world, and to help other people someday. Maybe I'll read for other people to help them do the same. It's not a chore, it's a tool, and it's something I would like to continue to enjoy doing. So I really had to step back and be like, okay, we don't have to read with every single tarot deck every single night. Like, if you get home from work and you're exhausted because it's been a fucking day, don't read with a tarot deck. You're in a bad mood. It's just gonna piss you off no matter what message you get. So, like, stop it. So I really had to that was my lesson for 2023 with working with tarot. Don't make it a chore. I feel like I did a pretty good job stepping back and allowing myself the freedom of not reading every single night with every single tarot deck. Because then it was just like, pulling the cards and putting them down, writing it down, and then moving on to the next one. And I wasn't really spending time to listen to what the cards were telling me. Sorry, it's a little bug. Or, to listen to what I was getting from the decks. That being said, I am determined in 2024 to work with every single tarot deck. I managed last year in 2023. I was very happy. I managed to work with every single oracle deck. I did move quite a few of my oracle decks out of my collection, and they are now in my get rid of pile. It's not a bad thing. I've said before, I have issues working with oracle decks, so I don't mind paring that collection down quite a bit. And the ones I moved out were ones that I got for reasons that, like, at a certain point I realized they weren't good reasons. I got it because I was in the store that day and I wanted to buy a deck and it was there. Or there were a couple decks I got because I liked the artist. And that's fine. I can still like the artist, but the deck did nothing for me. So, and there were a few I moved into my to get rid of pile that I wasn't getting anything from the decks because there was no keywords, there was nothing in the artwork that meant anything to me. Once I got to the guidebook, like, it didn't seem to match up with what was in the cards at all. So I was like, it's frustrating. That was the other thing that I allowed myself in 2023, because, like I said, in 2022, I got frustrated with a deck and I just forced myself to continue working with it. And it had started to happen towards the end of 2023. I think it was like November. I think it was like September. It's not October. It's October. I do know the months of the year. It was like October, sometime in October or November, I was working with the deck. And I could feel myself starting to get frustrated with how much disconnect there was. And I read with it a few times, and I was just starting to dislike it. I'm starting to hate this deck. And it was like, no, it's time to put it up. I'm not going to work with it. It's going to go in my to get rid of pile, and we're done with it. We're just moving it immediately on. I'm not going to try to force myself to continue working with this deck when I'm already getting frustrated with it, and it's making me not want to work with any of my other decks. So I allowed myself like that freedom in 2023 that if I got frustrated with the deck, I was done with it. It was going away, and I was gonna, put it in my to get rid of pile, and if I started missing it, then it would come back. But if I didn't, if I could put it in a pile and not think about it for a year, then we're done. Trying to be a little bit more conscientious of the decks I bring into, I prefer the word library. I really do. The English major in me prefers library. I'm talking about decks. But I'm trying to be more conscientious of the decks that I'm bringing into my collection and the ones that I keep in my collection. There's a couple reasons for that. One is I want to be able to work with all of my decks. I don't want a deck to just sit there and I'm like, oh, I got it because it was Kickstarter from one of my favorite artists and now I feel guilty getting rid of it. If I'm not going to work with it, if I'm not going to connect with it, I don't see the point in keeping it. I'm also trying to be more aware of like the creators that I purchase decks from, because I want my library to reflect the world that I live in, which is a vast, diverse, multicultural, varied world, and I want my deck library to reflect that. So I'm trying to be more aware and more conscientious when it comes to that. Sorry, I went way off script on that. Oh, my heat just kicked on. Sorry if you can hear that. It's forecasted to snow over the next few days, so it's gonna get cold. I need to get the fireplace cleaned out so I can get a fire going. That was the other thing. So I did manage to work with all of my tarot decks in 2023. I was very happy. I didn't manage to work with oracle decks. I managed to work with all of my oracle decks in 2023. I didn't manage to work with all of my tarot decks. The last time it got to that point, in 2022, when I realized that I had several months left and I wasn't working, like I still had a lot of decks left to work with, I just started like adding more decks. And so I wound up at one point working with like 12 or 13 tarot decks in a month, which was way too much. So I allowed myself in 2023 towards the end, as I realized I wasn't going to get to work with all of my tarot decks, to not overload myself. I'm sticking like with the number that I chose, the same number of decks that I'd been working with since, I don't know, the beginning of the year. I didn't try to add in more decks so that I could get all of the decks worked with. For one, there were decks that I couldn't because they were Kickstarter decks and I was still waiting for them, to arrive. And two, just like adding more decks wasn't going to help me. Like the point of this project isn't work with all the tarot decks no matter what. It's work with all the tarot decks so that I know what tarot decks need to stay in my collection and what tarot decks need to move out of my collection. And to work with all my tarot decks and to give them all their space. Because before I started doing this, like I said, what I was doing was, well, I don't think I said that, but what I was doing was I was going to like one or two decks, and I have a lot of decks and a lot of them were just sitting and collecting dust, and that made me sad. That's why I'm doing this. I'll probably continue doing this at least through 2025. We'll see if it continues past that, but I like doing this. I really do. I feel like it's given me a lot of opportunities to work with decks that I bought on a whim, that I wasn't really serious about having, that I wound up connecting with, and decks that I was serious about buying and wound up not and moving out of my collection. I feel like it's helping me really narrow down how I want my deck collection and my deck library to be. The few decks that I few decks that I had in my collection at the end of 2023 that I didn't work with, I'm actually working with at the beginning of this year of 2024, and they're all mini decks. So it's the that box is so beat up. The Orion's Tarot, the little mini. I love this little mini deck. I've talked about this in a video before, but that was one of the first decks that I was reading for my family with. So it's real beat up. The other one is the Light Visions mini. I have the full size. I'm guessing this one's not going to stay in my collection because I have the full size and I love the full size one, and I've worked with it long enough that I've connected with it, and I'm not sure why I bought the mini. I don't remember what my reasoning was. And the other one is the Outsider Tarot mini. I will never get rid of this. This was a Kickstarter exclusive. I can never get this again, so this will be staying in my collection even if I decide not to work with it anymore, because I can't ever get it again. Unless I find it like on eBay or something and pay like a lot of money, I'm sure. I have the full size of the Outsider Tarot. I will also never get rid of that one. Those two are staying. I doubt I'll ever get rid of the Orion's mini or the Orion's full size. I might at some point not have, but the mini, I love that one, and that one will never leave. And also it's mini, and I love miniature things. Obviously, like I have so many mini decks. I have two different mini deck collection videos, and we'll probably be making a third at some point because this one isn't featured in either of those videos. And I have a couple more mini decks that I've gotten since my last mini deck collection video. And the heat turned off. I'm also working with one of my newer decks. I got this towards the end of 2023. I did a walkthrough where I showed this and the other True Black and the True Black Anniversary. But I haven't worked with it yet, so it's one of my new decks, and I like introducing the new decks slowly, but I am working with this one in January. The Oracle decks, there wasn't really, like I said, I worked with all of my Oracle decks. I'm missing one on my desk here, it's fine. I worked with all of my Oracle decks in 2023, so there wasn't any left over, so I just picked the ones I wanted to work with. The other tarot decks I'm working with, I was like, I know I have more than one. One of the tarot decks that I'm working with in January is one that I had initially moved out of my collection and then started thinking about it and couldn't stop thinking about it, and so I'm giving it another go. It's the Native American Tarot. Ooh. If anybody knows anything about that, I tried looking it up to see like how accurate and respectful it is towards Indigenous folks, and it seemed to be pretty good. So if anybody has any other information, feel free to share. I'm trying to have decks in my collection that are multicultural in a positive way. That are, done by actual folks that are part of the culture. So yeah, the goal in 2024 is to finally get all of my tarot decks worked with, and to really narrow down and tighten up my library and how I want it to look moving forward, and to be a lot more careful about the decks that I buy. For a while there, I was just, every time a new deck was up or somebody talked about a new deck in a video, I was like, oh, buy, I need that. And so I'm trying to be a lot more careful with the decks that I bring into my library. But yeah, I really, like I said, I like doing this. It's really helped me connect with my decks. It's helped me move some decks on I feel like it's really helping me start to understand my aesthetic and really figuring out, like I said, what I want my library to look like, and really figure out like what sort of decks should I be like looking at that are more in tune with what my like I said, what my aesthetic or my interests are. So yeah, that was longer than I anticipated. I really wanted to talk about this, and I think I'm gonna try to, at the end of every month, talk about the decks I worked with that month. I think I mentioned wanting to do that before, and then life got in the way and I stopped making videos entirely. So I'm going to try to make that a goal for 2024, is at the end of every month just have like a roundup of decks that I worked with that month, and kind of talk about what I got from it. I really am trying to work on my talking and not saying so much, so I apologize. I am working on it, trying to be better. But thanks for hanging out with me and listening to me ramble. Like, comment, subscribe, all that fun stuff. Bye till next time.